Our lead this hour coming from the world of collegiate football. That's right, collegiate football. The rare and appropriate Maller monologue on college football, but not really so much about anything going on today. I know the bowl games are getting going and all that. But we assume you are aware that you've heard by now, but maybe not. Mike Leach, the head coach for the last few years at Mississippi State in the Southeastern Conference, Southern Fried Football, he has died. Passed away this week of complications from a heart condition, had a heart attack over the weekend, and was not able to come back from that. Leach suffering that incident on Sunday. He was airlifted to a hospital about 125 miles away from where he was living, and just could not do anything to bring him back. So 61 years old, should have been with us at least another 10, 15 years, at least another 10. And so Mike Leach, leaving this mortal coil here, there was a monsoon of tributes and the eulogies that have poured in to the sporting world. We're a little late to the party, but I wanted to spend a few good minutes paying homage to a coach that I had a chance to meet a few times over the years when he was at Washington State in the Pac-10, which eventually became the Pac-12 and all that. And so while we are late to the party, it's better to be late to the party than to not show up to the party at all. So please bear with us for a few good minutes. So let's discuss the question here. What are we going to remember about Mike Leach, the football coach, not the winningest coach of all time, didn't set all kinds of records. So I've got Simpatico, Dr. Seuss, and Ocean. And we'll mix all these things together here, and we'll make a happy story to a good life, a life well lived. So I will forever hold a special place in my heart for the stockpile of quips and wisdom from Mike Leach. Not that I necessarily used any of it in my life, but doing this job, you become very jaded. And you hear the same bullcrap over and over again. Now, these are first world problems, but we've often bellyached over the years that on these microphones, the very stale nature of athletic chatter, it's only gotten worse since I got into the business because of the corporate attitude towards sports, the amount of money that's in sports. It was big when I started. It's even more ridiculous now. It's redonkulous is what it is. And so what ends up happening is nobody wants to say anything that's even mildly interesting because, God forbid, you do that, you're going to get in trouble and you might lose your seat at the table. So what we get is an assembly line of meathead coaches and players stumbling and bumbling, supplying us with cliches, buzzwords, and catchphrases. And you can go to sportscliche.com right now and get almost verbatim, word for word, a carbon copy of what will be said before and after and during games. But Mike Leach was not that guy. He was the guy that colored outside the lines. He didn't follow the normal cliches, the talking points, the things that you're supposed to say. Don't say anything interesting. He wasn't that guy. Mike Leach was not afraid to do a 15-minute improv act at his daily news conferences. He was unprepared, unrehearsed, and would often shoot from the hip. And who knows what he was saying he knew about or not. Didn't matter. But he would also call a spade a spade. He had this simpatico delivery, this hokey delivery that was relatable, it was endearing, it was chummy, it was everyman, it was pleasant. And I could listen to Mike Leach talk about everything from pirates to politics, and I found it enchanting. I did. I just like the way that he approached his conversation with the media and the fans. Now, another part of this is, how was Mike Leach able to stand out from the crowd? Well, he obviously spoke differently. He didn't follow the normal talking points memo that was sent out for coaches in the sporting world. He followed the Dr. Seuss model of life. Be yourself, everyone else is taken. And another Dr. Seuss classic, oh, the places you'll go and the people you see. And I was reading some of the eulogies, and I thought I knew a lot about Mike Leach, but there were things in there that I didn't know about that I would like to share with the class, and you're in the class, so I'd like to share them with you. And when I was learning more about the life that Mike Leach lived as a football coach and what I had known of him since his days at Texas Tech, and actually at Oklahoma, when he was on Bob Stoops' staff at Oklahoma briefly back in the day. But Mike Leach, in many ways, lived a football life that was like a Steven Spielberg movie, a football version of Catch Me If You Can. It's one of my favorite movies. Frank Abagnale Jr. there, the guy that allegedly, who knows if it was true or not, but before the age of 21, he conned himself as a pilot. He was a lawyer, a doctor. He pretended to be all these things. They made a great movie about it. There's been books written about it. And he's worked for the FBI for years because he was supposedly such a conniving individual. But Mike Leach, his life, if you made a movie about him, he was a pirate, an attorney, a philosopher. And I've been to a lot of funerals over the years. I don't like to admit that, but a lot of people I've known over the years have passed away, family, friends I've worked with in the business and whatnot. And there's a song that gets played at pretty much every funeral. I'm sure when I die someday, maybe they'll play it at mine, and probably yours too. It's Frank Sinatra's My Way. All right, now the nearest end, the end is near. I face the final curtain, and he goes on and on. I've lived a life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway, and much more than this, I did it my way. Right, that was the gist of it. I probably butchered that, but that's the gist of the song. That was in many respects Mike Leach here. The guy was raised in a small town in Wyoming, mostly in Cody, Wyoming. Right now, the population in Cody, Wyoming is 10,000. It was named after Buffalo Bill Cody. Can you imagine what the population must have been like when Mike Leach was a kid? I'm guessing there weren't 10,000 people in Cody, Wyoming when Mike Leach was a little boy growing up. And he would go on to BYU. He played rugby. He was not a football player. He didn't play college football. He studied college football. He learned watching BYU football, but he didn't play. He got a law degree at Pepperdine, which, if you're not familiar, it's in L.A. It's in Malibu. Some expensive real estate there in Malibu. He co-authored a book on Geronimo, the Indian leader's approach to life, coached tremendous offensive football teams at a bunch of Power 5 conference schools in his career. And something I did not know, Hal Mummy, who is the mentor of Mike Leach, he told a story that I thought was great. And it summed up perfectly what Mike Leach was all about, what a great promoter Mike Leach was. So he's known, Leach, for the air raid offense, which was Hal Mummy's offense. He helped Hal Mummy come up with that, supposedly the legend of Mike Leach. Well, Hal Mummy said, listen, they were at, I think it was Valdosta, and this small school, and to get publicity back in those days before the internet, Mike Leach was like the hype man. He was like the guy in the corner that was hyping up the boxer. And so he would send out news releases to major newspapers to get them to write stories about this amazing offense. And Mike Leach, knowing how the media operated, realized, well, I got to come up with a sexy name because these newspapers will put it in there. They'll get some attention because that sells. That's good copy. So he's the one, according to Hal Mummy, that cooked up the name the Air Raid Offense. And it worked. Got a lot of attention. That helped Hal Mummy get a better job at Kentucky. It helped Mike Leach, and he had a wonderful run as a head coach. All right, last thing here, as we look back at the life and times of the late Mike Leach, is there a lesson from all this? And I don't want to get too deep and poetic on this. He's just a football coach after all. We happen to like sports, and so for us it's a big deal. But is there a lesson from Mike Leach's life? And if there is one, it's that he was an original, as we talked about with the Dr. Seuss stuff, a mensch. And in a deep blue ocean filled with fish, he was the merman. Right? He was the one that stood out there. He survived attempts to cancel him years ago when he was at Texas Tech and he lost his job because of an assault by Craig James, who was all upset with what Leach had allegedly done with his son. And more recently, more recently, Mike Leach had sent a joke out when COVID was going on about husbands and wives, and they attempted to cancel him. The woke army tried to cancel Mike Leach. He had to go to some sensitivity training because he sent out a picture of a noose, which was it was for just what it was like being cooped up with married couples who had to be around each other all the time when the world was shut down. And it was just a joke, and the wokesters, of course, have no sense of humor, so they said, oh, my God, that's racist, and Leach had to jump through hoops and all that. But he kept his head down through it all. He lived his life, and whether it was talking about Bigfoot or aliens or cowboys and Indians or Democrats and Republicans, none of it was off limits. None of it was taboo, right up until his premature departure from our world. And the guy was at football practice. I read on Saturday, and essentially, for all intents and purposes, he died on Sunday, although he was not pronounced dead until a couple days later. But the world is a little less colorful today. Mike Leach, quite the mensch. And in his little square there, he was a generational talent, Mike Leach.